and welcome to this episode of Done and Dusted. I'd like to welcome my fellow potty, Caroline Counsel from Caroline Counsel Family Lawyers, expertise with magnificence, and a big smile and lots of knowledge on top of that. And our special guest today is Dr. Stella Laletas, and Stella is well known in the area. She is a developmental and educational psychologist. She is a lecturer at Monash University in the Faculty of Education. She's also registered and endorsed psychologist, as I said, and has over 15 years of experience with young people. And her main research interests lie in understanding the impact of mental health and well-being on children's lifelong outcomes and reducing the impact of disadvantage on vulnerable populations. And to date, her research is focused on mental health literacy promotion in early childhood, primary and secondary settings, developing an integrated theoretical development framework that informs practice in schools, and projects that promote community and academic partnerships. And that's quite a mouthful, Stella. But when we drill down, you have one hell of a centered interest on children in an educational and developmental environment, but how you can progress those children and certainly promote their best interests moving forward. So just tell us a little bit about your research. And can I just say, as the audience knows, we've got a charity called To Be Loved Network. Stella's also involved with that network. She's one of the directors. And interestingly enough, and I think I've spoken to you about this, Caroline, she is developing or doing research for the development of a children's app at the moment under the auspices of Monash University, collaboratively, that's a hard word to say, working with To Be Loved Network. So over to you, Stella.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you for that very long, detailed introduction.
I know, it was a bit long. You
didn't miss a thing. It was brilliant.
Thank you.
I guess what I can add to that is where I came from before I came to Monash was working in schools. Started as a school teacher in the classroom, had a huge fascination, tried to understand why some children and young people were doing better at school than others. And that led me to doing postgrad psychology. During that time, I spent a lot of time as a school counsellor and then a school psych. And I guess that's where my interest was peaked around how do we help kids who are experiencing the difficulties of family breakdown and particularly ongoing parent conflict and high conflict, which is where my research sits at the moment.
Yeah, can I ask you, Stella, because you've been doing this for a long time, both at the coalface as a teacher and subsequently as a specialist psychologist. How have the issues for children changed over that time? Like, what are the big issues now as opposed to then?
Yeah, I think family breakdown's always been one that's been there, and mental health, mental health literacy. And I think it's improved over time in terms of having those conversations and being open about it. And in one way that's positive because you get a lot more kids coming through the door and seeking help, which is really great, rather than them not asking for help because of stigma and a whole lot of other things. So that's been on the improve, but what has happened is we're seeing that how kids are struggling in school and the difficulties they have, even just turning up at school on a day-to-day basis when things have been happening at home overnight or in the morning. When I was a school counsellor, I called it a revolving door because from 8:30 in the morning right till the end, there were kids coming through, particularly when I was working at a secondary school, who were just not coping at all and just needed support. Came home, would come to school, mum and dad would be arguing. They had a difficult night. They couldn't finish their homework because they didn't have the right textbooks when they went to dad's house or went to mum's house. They'd come in, they'd be really worried about getting in trouble because they hadn't done their homework. And so that's that side of me. My curiosity was piqued about how can we help these kids. And of course, you know, teachers, as kind and generous as they are, they don't always understand that kids come from these really fractured, difficult backgrounds, and sometimes will, you know, think, oh, these kids are naughty, or they're just, you know, their behaviour's so bad, they just hate me. So I guess from that perspective, that's why my research is focused in the way it is. Yep.
Caroline, from a lawyer's point of view, I just think teachers are the ants' pants when it comes to giving evidence about children. What's your experience about that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. They're at the coalface. They often get to see things that the parents themselves don't. And I was lucky enough to have a quick chat with Stella about this phenomenon, that they often see school as their safe place. So they'll often become, through often the work of the school counsellor, but also the school teacher, where they feel relaxed enough to say, you know, this is what's happening at home. And their unhappiness, if you will translate at school. So yeah, I think teachers do an amazing job. And bearing in mind, they're not just focusing on one kid that's out of kilter. They're focusing on a room full of children, all of whom have their own issues. So look, I come from a long line of teachers, and I've got nothing but respect for teachers. I think amazing work.
Yeah, I must say, I snuck into a prep reading session when one of our kids was doing prep. I only snuck in for 20 minutes, Stella and Kaz, because I couldn't take it anymore. I just don't know how teachers do it. I take my hat off to them. You know,
it is a labour of love. What can I say?
It is a labour of love. So do you think when you were acting as a school counsellor, Stella, did you see a lot of kids come and see you and blame themselves for their parents' separation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of self-blame, a lot of tears with self-blame, beating themselves up around, you know, it's my fault that mum and dad are not talking, or they're yelling, or it was my fault that I forgot my textbook and that caused an argument again. A lot of self-blame. And I think that's where my research is showing what's emerging is the support that we can give in a school environment in terms of helping them through that and navigate some of that. And that can be as easy as having a spare textbook, you know, that kind of thing, or spare materials, or just having, you know, the school counsellor or the wellbeing team understanding what they're going through and help them explain what's happened. That just having that support, that level of support, can make a huge difference.
Do you, Caroline, when you're seeing clients, talk to the parents about the importance of school, the regularity, the making proper networks, and the finishing school work on time and projects, things of that nature? Do you?
Absolutely, and particularly when I did the work that you do, Darren, as an independent children's lawyer, the fact that a family in chaos or a family in free fall, one of the first things to fall by the wayside is that continuity and that dedication to seeing things through at the school front. And I would say there's been an escalation of this sort of stuff. I don't know if you're planning to go there, Darren, with Stella, escalation of that dysfunctionality post-COVID. So I think COVID has presented its own set of challenges whereby things at school just literally nice to have, no, need to have, must have. It's just fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, what do you say about that, Stella? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely agree with that, especially after COVID. I think it's just trying to cope through some of the impacts of that. And I definitely agree with that. I think it's even harder on kids because they don't have that extra support. So maybe the kind of support they had from mum and dad, because of COVID and the complexities and the challenges, and that's probably diminished, and then they're struggling at school even more so. So yeah, definitely magnified the issues around how kids are coping in school.
Huge
And
issue.
I was just going to say, and school refusal has become a big one after COVID. So
Yeah,
there's a
I've
fair
heard
bit, yeah, that's an increase significantly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a lot of friends and colleagues who say, "Oh, my poor son or my poor daughter, COVID hit. They're in year 11 and they had to endure COVID." But sometimes I think we forget about the little ones
Yeah.
who have missed those, really important first years of school.
Absolutely, especially the preppies. Their first experience of school, and it's online. It was just that's the they were the kids that I was thinking about the most, the kinders, the preppies,
So
the year one students that need that social interaction with their peers.
Yeah, I was going to say, Stella, it's not necessarily just what's in the text or what's in the class learning, is it? It's really the swag bag of skills.
Correct.
That they're learning, and they're learning as much from each other these days than they are from the teacher.
Absolutely.
Like the whole face of learning has changed in recent times.
Absolutely. It's very different. It's different from that traditional kind of teacher stands in the front and delivers. It's more about inquiry. It's more about learning from each other. It's about cooperating. It's about building those skills, the social emotional skills. And a lot of learning takes place in the playground as they negotiate the rules of the game and so forth. So definitely that's had that impact on COVID. In fact, there's some research around with little ones, how they're struggling with their social and emotional skills from having been, sort of at home and not interacting with their peers, which is such a big part of development. So, yeah.
Yeah, huge. So I wonder, from what you've experienced, how are schools coping with that? How are they trying to make up for that lost time? Do you know? Have you had any experience with that, Stella?
Not of late, just from what's being reported. Teachers were struggling over COVID too. We did a fair bit of interviewing of teachers, them trying to help kids catch up. We're seeing the after effects of it now, and it's going to continue, I think, to unfold. It just doesn't miraculously disappear. It's going to take some time before some of those kids catch up with some of those skills in their development and the milestones in their development. But I absolutely agree with what you were saying before. Teachers are really, working really hard to try and make up the lost time as well, but it's difficult. It can be very difficult in that environment.
Yeah, very complex, particularly when you throw a child who's been exposed to family violence or parental separation.
Correct. Yeah.
Adds another tier to it, doesn't it?
Yeah. Multiple tiers.
So I remember, when you're starting off at kindergarten, even children have all this separation anxiety. I should imagine that separation anxiety has really peaked now as a result of COVID with children, because as you said, you've got preppies sitting at home in class looking at a screen, then all of a sudden they're in an environment which is a lot more noisy, a lot more compelling in terms of what's going on around them, and they've got to try and concentrate as well. It must be, I'd hate to think what it's like.
And you imagine the little one, who's been hearing, because children absorb. They absorb so much, it's not just them sitting in front of the screen. They're hearing, we shouldn't go out, it's dangerous, we could get COVID. There's all these kind of conversations that are around. And so now they're going out and they're trying to cope with not feeling safe, even in that environment. So they're understanding that we went through COVID and it wasn't safe, but I think some children have a harder time adjusting to those changes. Some will be very quick and bounce back very quickly, but there'll be others that are still very, very cautious in an environment that's outside their home or away from their secure anchor, which is their parent. So we're seeing a lot more of that.
And it is interesting, Caroline, because as family lawyers working in this field and even judges hearing cases, you don't really go outside of that square in terms of what's presented in court. That is, you don't you don't look for these other nuances that are actually causing children anxiety outside the normal range of garden variety stuff we see in court.
It's very much through the filter of the parents. So,
Mm.
or the report writer. So the family report writer may have got some of that nuance. But unless there's a major connection that may have caused somebody to speak to the school counsellor, or may have caused them to, as you say, go outside that square, we get a very filtered story, a very restricted narrative around usually parent-centric issues, not child-centric issues.
So true.
So the story that we get might be about, oh, they're hopeless at getting little Johnny to school, for example, rather than, gee, maybe little Johnny's actually struggling with being back in that environment for all the reasons we've just discussed. It's sad to say that we get clients who have their vision there, and it's sometimes quite blinkered around their child and what their child needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, speaking of school issues, we've sort of handpicked this little gem. It's from a fellow by the name of Oliver. We have this bit every week, Stella. We do what Caroline calls a Dorothy Dixer. I wish I knew a modern term for it, but anyhow, it's a Dorothy Dixer. I don't know about you, Kaz, but I'm getting a lot of these things sent to me via LinkedIn. Do you get them through LinkedIn or?
Yeah, usually, or an email.
Yeah. What's the best email for our listeners to send their Dorothy Dixers into?
Well, ccteam@ccfamlaw.com.au. Pretty easy.
Beautiful. All right. Can you just say one more time?
CCteam, as in the initials of my name,
Yes.
at CC, my initials, fam, short for family, law, law.com.au. What about you, Darren? What's yours?
Well, mine's easier, just darren@darrenmort.com.au. So that's pretty easy, but it just I've just been getting a few of these via LinkedIn. Not that I'm complaining, it's lovely people are listening, and it's yes, I'm very grateful for that, because our aim, of course, is to get the message out there, particularly with children's issues. So look, I'll read this one from Oliver this week. It's on a school issue. So let me have a look at it. It says, "Dear DD," we should have said D&D. "I have been married to Alice for 8 years, and we've lived together for a total of 11 years. We have a son, Oliver. Oh no, sorry. We have a son, Frederick, who is 10 years old, and Jasmine, who is 4 years old. We've just separated after being back home in Australia for only 12 months. Sorry, mate, it's such fine print, this, I can hardly see it. I'm a political correspondent," well, that's interesting, "and my job has taken us all over the world. It has been a great opportunity to see the world. However, as the children have got older, it has become more difficult. My last post was in Bangkok. Up to that time, Frederick had been, I think I'll just call him Fred, it's too hard to say,
Yeah,
Frederick, had been to 3 different international primary schools. Wow. It has been a bit unsettling for him. And he has found it hard to make friends. He seems okay, but Alice thinks he needs counselling, as he seems to struggle to socialise and his marks are not too good. Jasmine has been attending kinder this year. We may keep her back, as her kindergarten teacher said, due to her being overseas, another year in a kinder in Australia won't hurt with her learning before she is ready for school. Alice has remained at the former matrimonial home, and I live about 30 minutes away. I'm currently based in the CBD and work long hours, making school and kinder pickups and drop-offs impossible unless I use after-school care and before-school care. I spend each Wednesday overnight with the kids and every alternate weekend, Friday to Sunday, and half the holidays. I don't mind the time I'm having. However, of late, Alice seems to have focused on a newfound religion, Buddhism. I don't know whether it's newfound, but anyhow, she seems to focus on Buddhism. In addition, she wants to send Fred to Montessori and Jasmine to the same school the year after next. I don't want this. It's crazy. I just want a mainstream school. This year, Fred keeps missing school too. She takes him to morning Buddhist prayer sessions with her. I'm concerned at the amount of time he's missing. He's in grade 4 and already falling behind. He's missed about 15 days of school already last term. What should I do? I just want the kids schooled in a mainstream public school, and I don't want them missing any school time. She just doesn't seem to care. Please help, Oliver. Well, there you go. And I might say for the listeners, these names have been made up by me to make sure that we don't disclose any real people, of course. Otherwise, we get into trouble. So we've got the family, Alice, Oliver, and the 2 kids, Fred and Jasmine. Do we all get the factual situation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is unfortunately, Stella. This is all we get. We don't get any extra information. I can't complain. He's written quite a fulsome letter here, but this is the information we've got to work with. So what can you see the problems being, Caroline, from a lawyer's point of view to start with?
Well, I immediately think if you're a journalist, that's what he does, doesn't he? He's
he's legal
well, why aren't you flexible? Most of them seem to be flexible working online. So I'm a little concerned about the absenteeism of Dad, particularly at school changeovers, because Mum might think, well, I'm the big bad wolf, compelling Fred to go to school. And I'm the one that has to be there and grapple with him and do the business of persuading him. And Stella, I think you summed up beautifully what the post-COVID world feels like and looks like from a child's perspective. So going to prayers with Mum might just seem like heaven compared with grappling with the whole fear of going back to school. But obviously there's that whole parental difference of opinion about what school, what sort of education. That's the biggie, what sort of education. But there's these little niggles between Mum and Dad where Dad may be couching Mum in a negative light without saying, well, gee, what's my responsibility here as a parent to be present in Fred's life, to be able to actively encourage him so that Fred's hearing it in stereo from Mum and Dad. And it's that lack of commitment to each other and the message that they're giving to Fred that worries me the most.
You know what I reckon, just for you say anything, Stella, I reckon's happened, Kaz. I reckon he's been like posted in Bangkok and that, and I reckon he's been, he's had to do jobs and take a plane for the weekend or whatever during the week to report on issues. And I get the feeling, look, I might be wrong, Oliver, so I'm sorry if you're listening, but I get the impression that he hasn't been around a lot because of his jobs taking him places, particularly if they've been moving so often. 3 different international primary schools.
Yeah.
How does that affect kids, Stella, with the change in school so often at primary level?
Look, every child is different, and I know that's not the answer everyone wants, but so depending on the child themselves, they can cope in very different ways. Some people will say, and some kids are, they adjust very easily, and it depends on the support network they have as well from parents. And then there are others that find it difficult. I guess for parents and for us as adults, it's really trying to tune into what the needs of the child are and why they might not be coping, rather than blaming each other, blaming parents, blaming each other. It's really trying to understand, well, what is the child's needs? We call it being child-centered or person-centered. So I don't know whether there's been any assessment of that, either before or even now from Mum and Dad.
Well, it does say in this letter that he says that Alice, his wife, seems to think Fred needs counselling. And struggling to socialise, and his marks are not too good. I mean, surely they'd be sort of red flags, wouldn't they?
Definitely. Sorry, I missed that, Darren. But I mean, that's showing, those are the signs that we look for, the warning signs, I guess we call them. And they're the signs that teachers will pick up to say, You know, we're sensing that Frederick is struggling at school, and you know, if they're not making friends and they're finding that difficult, that's when kids start to pull away and don't want to go to school because it's a negative experience. So having the changes, which was what part of the original question, that can have made it harder for Fred. So I guess he needs, it's not irreversible, it just means that his needs need to be addressed. There needs to be understanding from Fred's perspective, and you know, counselling might help, but I think what can really help is understanding what it is that Fred needs, rather than mum and dad trying to guess. This would be the best thing for Fred. I think if you're going to an educational psychologist or even a clinical psychologist and having some assessments done around, and they've, you know, we call them educational assessments, trying to identify the needs of the child or the young person in terms of what's their learning like, where are they like cognitively, where are they like socially, where are they at in terms of the way they see problem solving in the classroom. Though that information opens up a door of understanding in terms of what might be happening for that child. They might be, you know, they may have a slight thing like, and often is a short-term memory or memory issues, which aren't significant, but enough to make children feel, oh, I'm not keeping up with everybody else. Oh, I don't get it. You know, I'm not smart enough. And it's not at all. It's just that they've got a processing or working memory issue that they just need a little bit longer than everybody else. Doesn't mean they're not going to do well at school. Doesn't mean that they're not going to understand the content. So those kinds of assessments really help the school, teachers and parents look at what the needs of their child are, and then you start thinking about, well, where's the best school environment? What's the best educational setting? Mum's chosen Montessori, dad doesn't like Montessori, but they probably need an assessment of what type of school would suit Fred the most, and what type of school would suit Jasmine the most. And that's the kind of work that I do when I work in schools, is it's part of my role when I do assessments, is trying to investigate and unpack what it is that the child needs, and then informing the adults in the room. So everyone kind of, we can try and get them on the same page if that's possible. But guessing is not highly recommended. Like, I think this environment will do, this environment will do. No, I don't think that works.
It's an art form, Stella. It's not just pick and flick.
Correct.
It's
and,
not,
you know,
and the tail on the donkey.
Yeah. And I heard, you know, like often we all as parents will say, I want this for my child, which is fair enough, but it may not suit your child in terms of what your idea of, you know, the school might be, or the type of style. Every school's different. They have a different school culture. There's a different school climate, and different environments will suit different children. So it's about finding the right fit for the child rather than
sometimes
making a decision.
I had a case a couple of weeks ago on this school issue, and it seemed for one of the parents it was much easier if all the three kids went to the same school for pickups and drop-offs and whatever. The other parent, who was the father, had done his research, and he'd had a look around the schools. He'd had interviews with the principals to see what the schools offered. He went to about 8 different schools, and he came to court and he said, no, I reckon, you know, the son should go to this school, my daughter should go to this one. The little girl, she was at kinder, so it wasn't relevant really at that particular juncture. But I thought, good on him, because we were talking about this the other week, weren't we, Caroline, in terms of unique children, the unique needs of children in a SIB ship. And we were talking about this, and I thought, yeah, it's easy just to ship all the kids off to one school, but these days there's so much more on offer for children in schools, isn't there?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have to take your cues from your kids. You have to take stock, what's best for them. And And if you're also talking about different socioeconomic groups, you then have that whole imperative about, but they must go to the school that I went to. And particularly that's where you get that snobbish attitude around, say, some Melbourne schools, and the expectation that my son, my daughter must go to where we went.
That's right.
No.
And it's usually for the parent that they're going to that school. Not, and I've encountered that a lot. That's why I say it. And yeah, they're not. It's not tuning into the needs of what their son or daughter might need.
Yeah.
And that's a good point that you made, Darren, because in seeing a lot of families, you know, the type of school that the eldest goes to might not suit the youngest. You know, it's a different, there'll be some schools that are more sporty. There'll be some schools that are more, you know, focused on the arts and you know,
so
drama and music. And there'll be other schools that are really more academic. So it depends on the child and knowing where that fits. And you often get that, well, it's much easier to drop them off in the one school. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what are the payoffs there? You might have some children that are not happy in that environment. They might be, but they might not be. So it's looking at it from a child's lens. And I know we talk a lot about this, Darren, around children's voice. And this is a classic example of really tuning into children and what their needs are. Not just what they're saying, but what they're showing us in terms of what their needs are.
Sure. All right. Well, I hope, Oliver, if you are listening, that some of that information is helpful to you and Alice, and most importantly to little Fred and Jasmine. In closing off today's episode of Done and Dusted, what are your parting words, your parting gems, Caroline?
Well, help is at hand. There are people that can actually help you make the right decision from a child-centric perspective. So don't wing it. Don't think you've got all the answers. Make the inquiry and get the help you need. And Stella's just illustrated that beautifully, that there are people with those skills.
Yes, I think your last comment was just about a closing comment, Stella, but what would you say in finishing?
Yeah, I think just following on from what Caroline was saying, the help is out there. Just go to the school and talk about your concerns. And there are people there that will listen. Teachers will often, and school counsellors want to help, and working together is really the key, not fighting each other. So
thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of Done and Dusted. I'd like to say special thanks to Dr. Stella Laletas, who has provided a lot of wisdom on this week's episode. I'd also like to thank my co-poddy, Caroline Counsel. It's always lots of fun, and really enjoy doing this show with her. So thank you. Have a great week, and see you next time.